Breaking news. The 90-day Fiancé tell-all has erupted in a wave of uncontrollable emotions as Elizabeth and Loren faced what may be their most heartbreaking and hurtful moment ever right in front of the cameras. As the tell-all began, everything seemed tense but manageable, yet it didn't take long before raw emotions overwhelmed both cast members. When Sean Robinson asked the first probing question, the energy in the room shifted dramatically. Elizabeth tried to remain composed, but you could see the pressure behind her eyes. Loren, usually strong and confident, struggled to maintain her calm as old wounds, unresolved issues, and deeply personal frustrations resurfaced all at once. The audience could feel the emotional weight begin to build second by second, creating a storm that no one could contain. As the conversation reached the breaking point, Elizabeth voiced something that instantly hit Loren in the most painful way possible. The shock on her face was immediate, and the entire studio froze. Loren's expression collapsed as she tried to hold back tears, but the emotional pain was too much. Within moments, Loren broke down, and as her tears began to fall, Elizabeth followed, realizing the impact of her words and the depth of hurt between them. What was meant to be a conversation turned into a deeply personal, emotional eruption that left everyone silent. Even Andre and Alexei had no words, stunned by the rawness happening right beside them. Every cast member felt the tension, the heartbreak, and the uncontrollable wave of emotion filling the room. This wasn't just reality TV. This was two people in real pain, facing years of unresolved feelings in the most public way possible. The emotional shockwave from Elizabeth and Loren's breakdown spread across the entire tell-all set like a silent explosion, leaving even the most outspoken cast members stunned into absolute silence as the weight of the moment pressed down on everyone present. Sean tried to regain control, but her voice softened instantly as she recognized that this wasn't ordinary drama. This was real emotional damage unfolding in real time. While Elizabeth attempted to speak through shaky breaths, Loren kept wiping her tears, trying desperately to steady herself. Yet every word spoken carried more weight, more history, and more unresolved tension that neither of them could ignore anymore. The camera zoomed in, capturing every trembling lip, every tear sliding down their faces, every painful second of silence that stretched longer than anyone expected. In that raw moment, it was clear that both women had been holding in far more pain than anyone realized, pain buried under years of misunderstandings, family pressure, public opinions, and emotional exhaustion brought on by the overwhelming spotlight of reality television. As Elizabeth tried to apologize, her voice cracked again, revealing just how fragile she had become under the pressure. Loren looked at her with hurt still visible in her eyes, torn between wanting to forgive and still processing the sting of everything that had been said. The tension grew heavier as the audience watched without blinking, wondering if the two would find any resolution, or if this moment would shatter their relationship even further. Behind them, the husbands, usually fiery and vocal, remained shockingly quiet, their faces filled with concern, confusion, and helplessness. Even Andre, known for jumping into every argument, kept still, clearly understanding that this situation was far deeper and more sensitive than any ordinary on-screen conflict. Meanwhile, social media began exploding with live reactions as fans typed frantically, reacting to the emotional disaster unfolding before their eyes. Comments poured in. "I've never seen them cry like this. This is the most emotional tell-all ever. What just happened? My heart is breaking for both of them. And this isn't drama. This is real pain." In the studio, Loren finally managed to speak, her voice barely steady as she expressed how deeply she had been affected by the misunderstandings, pressures, and unspoken issues that had been building over time. Elizabeth listened quietly, her head lowered, realizing how long this emotional volcano had been simmering beneath the surface. Every sentence Loren spoke felt like another emotional punch, not out of intention but out of truth. The tell-all had turned into a confessional, a place where years of bottled-up feelings were finally pouring out in one unstoppable stream. And as the moment continued, everyone, cast, crew, and viewers, knew that this was only the beginning of a much bigger emotional journey between Elizabeth and Loren. As the emotional tension continued to rise on the tell-all stage, the atmosphere grew heavier with every passing second, creating a sense of suffocating silence that even the camera seemed hesitant to break. And while everyone watched in total disbelief, Elizabeth and Loren remained locked in a painful exchange of emotions that neither had planned for nor expected to face so publicly. The weight of years of unspoken words hung between them like an invisible barrier, each breath they took trembling with the fear of what the other might say next. Sean tried to gently shift the conversation, but both women were too deeply immersed in the moment to step back. Elizabeth's eyes were red, swollen from tears she tried so hard to suppress, while Loren's voice trembled with a mix of heartbreak and frustration, revealing a vulnerability that viewers had rarely seen from her. The rawness of their emotions pulled the entire cast into their orbit, forcing everyone to become silent witnesses to a deeply personal confrontation that had erupted without warning. As Loren attempted to explain the misunderstandings that had built up over time, her voice cracked again, that crack carrying more truth than any argument or justification ever could. Elizabeth listened with a pained expression, realizing how much hurt she had caused without fully understanding it before this moment. She tried to interrupt, but Loren continued, pushing through her tears to finally let out everything she had been holding onto silently for months. The studio lights reflected off the tear streaks on both their faces, amplifying the emotional intensity even more. Even the camera crew, usually unfazed by drama after years of filming reality TV, glanced at one another, acknowledging that this was different, this was real, unfiltered pain. Andre shifted uncomfortably, clearly desperate to step in, but equally aware that anything he said could make the situation worse. Alexei kept his gaze fixed on Loren, his protective instincts fighting against the uncomfortable truth that she needed to voice her feelings without interference. Fans online continued exploding with reactions as clips of the emotional confrontation began circulating instantly across social platforms. People typed comments like, "This is too real, I can't handle it. I've never seen them break like this. This is more than drama, this is trauma." And the tell-all wasn't ready for this level of honesty. Meanwhile, back on stage, Elizabeth finally found the courage to respond, her words heavy with regret, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. She admitted that she never realized the extent of the hurt Loren had been carrying or how deeply the misunderstandings had cut into their relationship. Her voice shook with guilt as she tried to express her side of the story, revealing the emotional battles she had been fighting privately, battles she had never shared publicly before. The tension softened slightly, but the pain lingered in the air like a thick fog that refused to clear. It was obvious that healing wouldn't be instant. Too many wounds had been left untreated for far too long. The tell-all, instead of showcasing the usual dramatic clashes and confrontational entertainment, had accidentally opened a doorway into the emotional reality of two people who had been silently hurting long before the cameras started rolling. The intensity on the tell-all stage kept rising as Elizabeth and Loren continued confronting the emotional truth they had both avoided for so long, and with every word spoken, the atmosphere tightened like a rope pulling the entire room into their shared storm, leaving no one unaffected by the raw vulnerability pouring out between them. Sean's attempts to mediate were gentle, but ultimately powerless against the emotional avalanche unfolding in front of her. Elizabeth tried to steady her breathing, but each time she looked at Loren's tear-streaked face, her heart seemed to sink even deeper, realizing just how much damage had been done through misunderstandings, assumptions, and unspoken resentments. Loren, still wiping her tears but refusing to back down, continued expressing the emotional toll that had been building inside her, revealing moments of hurt, confusion, and disappointment that she had kept hidden from everyone, even from those closest to her. The more she spoke, the more the weight of her words hit Elizabeth, who seemed to shrink under the realization that her actions, intentional or not, had created wounds she never knew existed. The entire cast watched with a mix of empathy and discomfort, recognizing that this emotional confrontation was far beyond typical reality show drama. This was something deeper, something real, something that forced everyone to confront the truth about how relationships can fracture silently until the moment they explode. Andre looked torn, his usual confidence completely stripped away as he watched Elizabeth struggle through the emotional wreckage. Alexei's jaw tightened with protective concern, but But he remained silent, knowing that stepping in would take away Loren's moment to finally speak her truth. The studio felt frozen in time, as the emotional energy grew so intense that even the air felt heavy. Viewers at home couldn't tear their eyes away as the confrontation unfolded without any script, any filter, or any attempt to soften the blow. Social media exploded even further as people reacted in real time, typing comments filled with shock, sympathy, and raw emotion, calling this the most heartbreaking tell-all segment the show had ever aired. Meanwhile, Elizabeth, overwhelmed by guilt and emotional overload, finally broke the silence with a trembling voice as she attempted to explain her side with honesty and vulnerability, revealing how she had been dealing with her own pain, her own pressures, and her own invisible battles that she had kept hidden beneath a strong exterior. Her confession didn't erase the hurt, but it cracked open another layer of truth that Loren hadn't been expecting. The exchange continued to deepen, pulling both women into a moment of emotional transparency that neither of them had prepared for, and the tell-all began to feel less like a reunion show and more like an unintentional therapy session where years of bottled emotions had no choice but to spill out all at once. As the cameras continued rolling, capturing every tremble, every tear, and every heavy breath, it became clear to everyone watching. This confrontation was far from over as the emotional confrontation dragged on. The atmosphere inside the tell-all studio had become so heavy that every breath Elizabeth and Loren took seemed to echo through the room. And even though the cast remained silent, their faces revealed the shock and empathy they felt while witnessing two women unravel years of suppressed emotions right before their eyes. The lights felt brighter, the air warmer, the silence deeper, and every second stretched longer than the last as both Elizabeth and Loren struggled to keep control over the tears streaming down their faces. The host, Sean, attempted to gently guide them out of the emotional spiral, but it was clear that neither of them was ready to step away from the heavy truths they had finally allowed themselves to face. Elizabeth's voice wavered as she spoke again, trying to articulate the pressure she had been under, explaining how she had felt misunderstood, judged, and constantly pulled between family expectations and her own personal struggles. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, revealing far more than her words ever could, showing how deeply she had been affected long before this tell-all moment. Loren listened intently, her expression softening but still carrying the weight of the pain she had experienced. She took a breath, slow and shaky, before responding, emphasizing how abandoned and unsupported she had felt during moments when she needed understanding the most. Her voice cracked mid-sentence, creating another rip through the room's fragile emotional balance. The audience watching at home felt their hearts clench as they saw two women who had always appeared strong, confident, and composed finally exposing their vulnerabilities, insecurities, and emotional scars in the most unfiltered way possible. Clips of the confrontation continued spreading across social media like wildfire, with fans expressing disbelief, sympathy, and emotional overwhelm at the rawness of what they were witnessing. Comments like, "I can't stop crying, this is too real," "they're breaking on camera," and "this is the most painful tell-all ever" kept appearing, proving that the moment had struck a chord with viewers worldwide. In the studio, Andre looked down at the floor, clearly shaken by seeing Elizabeth in so much pain, while Alexei's eyes rarely left Loren, his face reflecting a mix of worry and helplessness. Both men, typically strong and outspoken, seemed powerless in this moment, recognizing that the emotional wounds being exposed were deeper than any external defense could fix. The tension in the room continued to build as Elizabeth tried once more to explain how much she genuinely cared about Loren, despite all the misunderstandings, her voice filled with regret and emotional exhaustion. Loren's eyes softened again, revealing a flicker of connection beneath the layers of hurt, though the pain was still very present, hovering between them like a shadow that refused to disappear. The tell-all, rather than calming down, had transformed into a raw emotional journey that none of the cast, crew, or viewers had expected, and it was clear that the story was far from reaching its conclusion. The emotional battle between Elizabeth and Loren continued unfolding with an intensity that no one on the tell-all stage had been prepared for, and as the minutes passed, the weight of every unspoken feeling, every misunderstood moment, and every unresolved conflict grew heavier, wrapping the entire studio in a thick silence that even the camera seemed hesitant to disturb. Elizabeth's breathing was still uneven, her eyes glossy with tears she struggled to hold back, while Loren kept swallowing hard, trying to steady herself even though her heart felt like it was breaking all over again right there under the bright studio lights. Sean's calm voice tried to guide them gently, but neither Elizabeth nor Loren could escape the emotional storm they were trapped in. The tension had grown too deep, too personal, too real. Elizabeth finally, the strength to speak again, her voice trembling but determined, as she explained how overwhelmed she had been for so long, trying to balance family relationships, public scrutiny, and her own mental battles. She admitted she hadn't always communicated her struggles properly, and that sometimes her silence had unintentionally caused more hurt. Every word felt like it carried the weight of a confession she had kept buried for far too long. Loren listened closely, her eyebrows tightening as she absorbed each emotional admission. The pain in her eyes was still present, still raw, but something softer began to flicker beneath the sadness, a small sign that she was finally hearing Elizabeth in a way she hadn't before. When Loren responded, her voice was fragile yet honest, revealing how isolated she had felt, how unsupported she believed she was during certain painful moments, and how confused she had been by actions that had never fully been explained until now. She confessed the emotional burden she had been carrying silently, feeling as if her feelings didn't matter or weren't understood by the very people she wanted support from. The cast continued watching in stunned silence as the confrontation deepened, knowing that they were witnessing something far more real than anything typically shown on the series. Even the crew behind the cameras shifted uncomfortably, visibly affected by the emotional unraveling taking place right in front of them. Social media exploded further, with thousands of viewers typing frantic reactions, calling the moment historic, heartbreaking, and the most intense emotional scene ever aired on 90 Day Fiancé. The emotional weight pressed harder when Elizabeth reached out verbally, her voice cracking as she told Loren she never meant to hurt her, never meant to make her feel alone, and never realized how deeply their misunderstandings had cut into her heart. Loren looked down for a moment, tears clinging to her lashes, as she processed everything Elizabeth was finally saying out loud. The tiniest shift appeared in her expression, something between pain, relief, and the first step toward possible forgiveness. But the wounds were still fresh, still bleeding, still tangled with too many memories to heal instantly. The tell-all continued recording every second, capturing a level of honesty, vulnerability, and emotional depth rarely seen in reality television, and it became painfully clear that the confrontation was far from finished. The emotional confrontation between Elizabeth and Loren kept intensifying as the tell-all reached a point where everyone watching could feel the rawness vibrating through the room. And even though neither of them wanted to continue hurting, the truth kept pouring out in a way that neither could stop. Elizabeth's hand shook slightly as she tried to keep her voice steady, but every sentence she spoke revealed how emotionally drained she had become, how much she had internalized, and how deeply her own fears and insecurities had shaped her reactions in ways she never intended. Loren's eyes softened a little as she listened, yet the pain inside her remained visible, lingering like a shadow that refused to fade even when understanding began to emerge. She blinked several times, fighting back another wave of tears, and when she finally spoke again, her voice quivered, but carried a truth that cut straight through the tension filling the air. She confessed how often she had felt unsupported during her most vulnerable moments, how isolated she felt when her emotions were dismissed, and how painful it had been to navigate personal struggles without feeling understood by someone she had cared about deeply. Her words landed heavily on Elizabeth, who closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the emotional blow with a mix of guilt, sadness, and regret. The cast continued watching in stunned silence, their expressions filled with empathy and shock, knowing they were witnessing something far more genuine than anything typically seen on reality television. Even the camera crew looked affected, their movements slower, their faces reflecting the emotional intensity of the moment unfolding right in front of them. Meanwhile, fans online continued flooding social media with reactions, calling the scene unforgettable, heartbreaking, and overwhelmingly real. Comments like, "This is too emotional to watch. I never expected them to break like this," And this tell-all is on another level emotionally, spread rapidly as viewers around the world connected with the depth of the confrontation. Back on the stage, Elizabeth tried again to respond, her voice barely stable, as she explained her own emotional exhaustion, her fear of confrontation, and her struggle to communicate the things she had kept buried inside. She admitted that she never truly understood how much she had hurt Loren until this moment, and her expression revealed a mixture of sorrow and remorse that made the entire studio fall even quieter. Loren took a deep breath, processing Elizabeth's words, and for the first time since the confrontation began, her tears slowed, replaced by a look of conflicted contemplation. She wasn't ready to fully forgive, but she was ready to finally understand, and that shift in energy rippled through the room like a soft, hesitant step toward healing. But even with that slight shift, the emotional wounds were still wide open, still bleeding, still demanding more truth, more honesty, and more vulnerability before anything could truly be resolved. The tension remained, heavy and unmoving, as the tell-all continued capturing every fragile second of their emotional unraveling, reminding everyone watching that real pain doesn't disappear quickly, it demands to be understood.